Father, in the name of Jesus, we praise you, we glorify you, and I thank you that you are moving in this place, that you are faithful, that you're a promise keeper, that you're a miracle worker, and that if you say it, I can trust it, and I don't have to worry about it. Lord, I pray that you would open our hearts, our ears to receive what you say through your word today. And Holy Spirit, please come and move on us. We need you. We invite you, not that you need an invitation, but we invite you anyway. Please come and have your way here and be glorified. Be lifted up in this place. In Jesus' name, if you agree, say amen. Amen. I'm so ready to preach. Get your Bible out. Exodus chapter 6. That's where we're going to be. Last week, I shared with you from just a place of personal time with the Lord. Shared with you from a little of what God was just showing me in my private study. I didn't necessarily plan to preach what I preached last week, nor did I plan to preach this week, but it's kind of a continuation in that same vein. Last week, we looked at the life of Moses and how, at least in 3 ways, I believe his life and how he handled things could speak to us as we walk through things. Because even when people didn't listen to him, he still did his part. He did what God told him to do. And then even when people still wouldn't listen, he went back to the Lord. How many of you know you can always go to God? That's actually the best place to process your emotions and your questions and the things that may not feel like you thought they were going to feel. He's the best place to go. And that's where Moses took his concerns. And then we also saw that even when people aren't listening, when you're sharing what God tells you to tell, when you're telling the gospel, or even if it's just truth, but people aren't receptive, we see that he also showed us that we can trust that God is still moving in the background, that his promise doesn't change just because somebody didn't receive it well, but that his promise is true. And just because something hasn't happened yet doesn't mean it's not going to happen. Just because it's maybe slow in coming in your estimation doesn't mean that it's not coming. So today we pick up. We made it all the way through Exodus chapter 5 last week, all the way up to verse 1 of chapter 6. So we're going to dive in verse 6 today of Exodus chapter 6. And this is where God tells Moses again to go and deliver a message. If you're ready, say, let's go. Say therefore to the sons of Israel, I am the Lord. That should be all you got to know anyway. But he goes on. He says, I am the Lord. And I will bring you out from under the labors of the Egyptians, and I will rescue you from their bondage. I will also redeem you with an outstretched arm and with great judgments. Then I will take you as my people, and I will be your God. And you shall know that I am the Lord your God who brought you out from under the labors of the Egyptians. I will bring you to the land which I swore to give to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord. So Moses here is again assigned his part by God. And his part is to go and tell these people, these chosen people of God, the message of God. And this is a pretty hopeful message this time, right? I mean, this is literally saying, hey, I know you've been in bondage. I know you've been suffering. I know you've been under some things, but God's heard you and he's seen you. And now he's going to bring you out of that bondage. He's going to deliver you from what you were in and bring you into something that he's promised you. That's a good message, right? That's the kind of message I actually enjoy delivering. Not every time do I get to enjoy what would be pleasant if it's a word from the Lord, but this is a good one. I like bringing these kind of things. And this message here that he brings to the people of Israel harkens back to a promise that God made years ago. It's the promise that God is going to bring his people into the land of Canaan and give it to them as a possession. It's a promise that's mentioned way back in Genesis chapter 12 initially. In verse 6 of that chapter, it says, Abram passed through the land as far as the site of Shechem to the oak of Moreh. Now the Canaanites were in the land at that time, and the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your descendants I will give this land. Somebody say he will. He will give them the land. So God makes the promise. And how many of you know when God makes a promise, it's going to happen? Amen? So God says he will do it. Let's say it again. He will. He will. So God makes the promise. Now, he doesn't say how it's going to happen. He doesn't say when it's going to happen. He just says it will happen. That's the promise. Here we are now in Exodus, hundreds of years later. You think you've waited a long time for a promise from the Lord. Abraham didn't see this promise come to pass in his lifetime, nor did his son Isaac, nor did his son Jacob. This is a promise. When Moses comes with this very hopeful message to the people of Israel, we are now generations on, centuries on, and this promise has yet to be fulfilled. There was this time about, my early 20s. I can't remember exactly how old I was. And I was in this season of life where I had believed in God for a while. As a teenager at 13 years old, I gave my life to Jesus. And I definitely had some things change in my life, and I knew I'm saved. But I didn't really live for the Lord. You don't have to raise your hands, but maybe some of you can identify with that. You gave your life to Jesus, and you were still doing your own thing. Well, in my early 20s, God wrecked me. And for about 18 months of my life, I was radically changed. And while that was happening, I was attending a church. And at this church one morning, I was worshiping. And in worship, I always just go in, man, and I'm giving all I got to the Lord. But this one specific morning, I was praising God, and my mind literally, it felt like it detached. Like my mind went to a whole separate place. Never happened to me before in worship. And I just started thinking about my future family. I started thinking about my future wife and kids. So early 20s, I was not married, far from it. Had no kids. But my mind just went there. And I started thinking about my future kids. I'm thinking about my wife. And it was really weird. My head was just there for, maybe a few minutes. And it was like I snapped back into the moment. It's like, all right, that was different. And I just kept worshiping the Lord. Didn't know what to make of it. Well, on the way home from church, I get this call from the guy who was my roommate at the time. And this guy calls me up. He's like, Kees, because that's what people called me back then. Kees, I got to tell you about this. And I can tell he's like a little rattled. I'm like, okay, what's going on, man? He said, I was just in church, and you're probably going to think I'm crazy. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before in my life. I was in church, in the middle of church, and I had what felt like this out-of-body experience. And this is coming from my friend who was very much, let's say, skeptical of the spiritual gifts still operating in the church today. He didn't really get down with things that I had known and experienced were true now, even though I used to be skeptical, like prophetic visions, dreams, prophetic words, healing. He's like, I don't want none of that. He said, man, you're going to think I'm nuts, but in the middle of worship, I had a vision. And the vision was of me and you, and we were at a hospital. And when we were at the hospital, we go up to this window, and we looked through the window, and we were just looking at your baby girl. And I'm like, whoa. I was like, and he's already freaked out. I said, so this just happened? He said, yeah, man, I don't know what to do with this. Yeah, he's just, And I said, well, you're never going to believe this. But I was just in worship, too, at a church across town. And I told him, I was like, my mind went to my future wife and kids. Never happened before. Because, I was wanting a wife then. I was very much set on a wife. I was not thinking about kids. Never thought about kids. I was just like, who's going to be my wife? I never even met Chelsea. Didn't know who she was. But my mind went there, and that freaks him out more. And I was like, when did it happen? And it seemed like me down to the moment that literally this thing happens where my don't believe that God still moves in these ways friend has a first ever vision that seemed prophetic to me. I don't know, again, where all you're at, you're watching, you're in the room, you feel about these things. If you're skeptical of them, I can tell you I used to be, but now I've experienced them, moved in them. God's moved through me in them, and I know they're real. But for somebody like him to be like this, I got no grid for this, and I'm telling him, look, this happened at the same moment, same time, and I knew it was a word from the Lord for me. So from that moment on, I always knew, I was like, that's a prophetic picture of my future that God has for me. He's given me a picture of a promise. So I knew I was going to have a baby girl, just knew it. So even when I met Chelsea years later and we got more serious, we started talking about stuff and kids, I was like, well, I know we're having at least one kid and one of them is going to be a girl because God's already showed me all these years ago. And again, most of you guys know me in here. You guys know my firstborn is named Amaris Clementine Kees. Amaris being a Hebrew meaning of gift from God. That's what I feel like she is to us. Literally a promise that I got in my early 20s took about 10 years to come to fruition. Didn't know how it was going to happen. Didn't know when it was going to happen. But when it's from the Lord, I knew I was going to have a baby girl. Now Moses here is centuries on from a promise given from the Lord. Centuries. And Moses is told by God to share this message with these people who are beaten down, who are in slavery. God says, again, go and play your part. That was verse 9. Well, that was verse 8. Verse 9. So Moses said this to the sons of Israel, but they did not listen to Moses. You can't play their part. Just a reminder, you cannot play their part. You can share the message, you can share the truth, you can hope and pray that they will receive it, but you cannot play their part. You can't do it. And this, for me, just to be really honest, is one of the most frustrating things in all of life. I can't handle it. That I just can't go and play your part because I want to. Are there any other recovering control freaks in the room? You get it, what I'm talking about. I want to actually play your part. If I see a problem, I want to fix it. If I see something wrong, I want to go bring a resolution. And so if I see something in your life that could be addressed, but yet you won't address it, it drives me nuts. There's at least one other of me like that. Oh my gosh. It drives me nuts. I want to. I want to show you truth. And then I want to see you get it. And then I want to see you react to the truth and implement it into your life in such a way that you set yourself up to walk in God's best for you. But I can't. And it kills me. I can't do that part because God hadn't set it up that way. He has his part. I have my part. You have your part. And none of these people can play each other's parts. Right? You, me, and God. We all have our part. So Moses here, he plays his part. He tells them the truth. He actually shares a message that is hopeful, that is amazing, that should have caused celebration and excitement and joy. Yet they did not listen. Why? On account of their despondency and cruel bondage. Another translation reads here, anguish of spirit. Another one reads discouragement. Another says they didn't listen because of their broken spirit. So even though these are God's chosen people, they too sometimes do not listen to the words of God. And sometimes it's due to circumstances. Sometimes it's due to emotions. God's people too, have emotions that they carry around. And we don't actually know if they're dealing with those emotions in a healthy and godly way. We don't know, for example, if they return to the Lord, they go back to God when they don't know what to do with life, when life doesn't look like what they thought it would look like. We don't know if they're doing that. We don't know if they're processing their emotions with the Lord like they could be. We don't know if they're believing that God's still moving in the background when they can't see it, when things don't pan out. We don't know if they're doing their part. But these people, in this specific situation, they did not listen because of what? Their despondency, discouragement, anguish of spirit. And maybe you're there today. It wouldn't matter what news I could bring you. It would not be enough to make you think something's going to change. You've been beat down, pushed down so long that you just can't receive good news anymore. That something's happened in your life over and over and over again to put you in a circumstance and an emotional state where you can't even begin to believe God would do something that would make your life be better. You might be there today. You might be feeling despondent, discouraged, in anguish of spirit. But God is the God of the impossible. He is still taking broken things and putting them back together. He is still taking dead things and breathing new life into them. He is still taking things that are disorderly and beyond hope in your estimation and doing things in those situations that you have no hope of doing on your own and you can't comprehend how they could get better. God is still doing these things. He's still doing it. He's still moving. But I know, as much as I say that, you might be sitting there thinking, yeah, but Adam, you don't know my situation. You don't know the whole story. You don't know all of my past. I've shared some things, but there's some things people just don't know. You don't know what I've walked through. You don't know the pain. You don't know the disappointment I've felt. And you're right. You're right. I don't know. I don't know the extent, and I do not know what it is like to walk in your shoes. But I can tell you, I know what pain's like too. I experience heartache, frustration, disappointment constantly. I know what it's like to be discouraged. I know what it's like to want to give up. See, I can identify with Moses in this story. I can identify with actually being obedient even though I don't want to, and following through on what I feel God is leading me to do, and it's met with blech. I know what that's like. I know what it's like to actually do what God's told me to do, to bring a message to not only people, but His people, and be rejected. I know what it's like to be feeling isolated and like nobody gets me, not only from the people of the world, which I kind of expect, but from God's own people. And I know it sucks. It's terrible. So I know what it's like to feel pain. I can identify with Moses, but to be honest, I can identify with the Israelites as well. I've been in that position where somebody is speaking truth to me and I just do not want to hear it. I know what it's like to be sitting there in my own crap so deep that people can bring me hope and truth, and I'm just like, I don't want to hear it. Yeah, that's good for somebody else because God does that, but that's not for me. I've been there. I know what it's like. But no matter what position that you find yourself in today, no matter the situation or circumstance, I want to tell you the truth anyway, and it's very simply this: God is still moving. He is still moving. He's still in control. God is still on the throne. He is still doing things that you oftentimes will not see or will not comprehend or know how he's doing it or why he's doing it or why the timing is happening like it is. But I'm telling you, God is moving. He is still on the throne. He is still good. He is still faithful. And on top of that, he sees you. God sees you in every moment, in every circumstance. The writer of the psalm, in Psalm 56, verse 8, is having a really real moment with the Lord. But I love what he says because it shows you a picture of the God that we serve. He says, "You have taken account of my miseries. Put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your book?" This is not a God who's far off. This is not a God who stands at a distance while you weep and doesn't care. This is a God who sees you. It says he's taken an account. When you're weeping, when you're hurting, when you don't understand things in life, it says he sees you. He takes an account of it. And this picture of literally collecting your tears. This is a God who is all powerful, but is also close. He sees you. In fact, another psalm speaks to that. Psalm 34:18. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. If you feel crushed, it doesn't mean you have no faith. If you feel broken, it doesn't mean that you have no good relationship with Jesus. No, it means you're crushed. But it says God saves those that are crushed, that he's close to those who are broken hearted. And then he binds up our wounds. That's what 147:3 says in Psalm. He heals the brokenhearted and he binds us up. So he sees you, and it also means he don't want you to stay there. He wants to do something about it. Our God is not apathetic to your hurting and your suffering and your pain. That ought to make some of you feel so comforted, because I know it's true in life. Look, I want things to work out good, but sometimes, even if they're not good, just to be known that I'm seen, known that I'm heard, makes all the difference. Even if you're not going to fix it right now, Lord, do you actually see me? Do you actually see what I'm going through? And the answer resoundingly is yes. I see you. And I love you. And you can cast all your anxieties on me. And yes, you have a cross to pick up and carry, but my burden is still light. Come get yoked up to me. You can have peace. These are things God says in the Old Testament to the New. He sees us. He cares about us. And I believe that he's actually wanting to show you something today in his word. Because that's where truth comes from. I'm just the middleman. See, my part is to bring the word, and I'm going to be faithful. Even if you try to block this out and you say, now maybe somebody else can be healed by God, I'm telling you it's for you, but I can't make you receive it. That's your part. God's part is right here. He's doing it. He says, I'm ready to heal you. I'm ready to bind it up. I'm ready to heal the brokenhearted. I'm ready to mend those things in your life. I'm the one communicating it. But just like Moses couldn't control the outcome, I can't control the outcome today here either. I'm just serving you up some truth that should be very comforting. And if not at this moment in your life, just hold on. You're going to need it. Just drop it on down in there, have that deposit of truth. That way you can pull it out later. God says, I'm going to do my part. I'm not perfect, but today, Adam Kees, I'm doing my part. Here's the truth. Now you can eat it up and receive it, or you can stay behind that wall. That's not for me. God doesn't do that in my life. You're buying into a lie, lady. That ain't the truth. I don't care what your circumstances say. Can I say it that harsh? Your circumstances say otherwise. God has a word, and it is for you. He will bind up the brokenhearted. He will bind up those who have wounds. So, you do with it what you want. Unfortunately, God's people don't listen in verse 9. I hope you guys are different. Verse 10. Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Go tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the sons of Israel go out to his land." In other words, he's saying it again. Here's your part, Moses. Go do your part. No matter what they do, no matter if they receive you or not, here's your part. Tell that Pharaoh, let my people go. That's the message. Go do your part. Verse 12. But Moses spoke to the Lord, and he said, "Behold, the sons of Israel have not listened to me. How then will Pharaoh listen to me, as I am unskilled in speech?" So the Israelites, Moses' people, are discouraged. Now it sounds like Moses is getting discouraged. The people of Israel look at their circumstances and are caught up in their feelings. Now all of a sudden, Moses starts to look at his circumstances. Isn't it funny? Maybe funny is the wrong word. Have you ever noticed how discouragement spreads? Here Moses sees them discouraged, not listening, looking at circumstances. Now he looks at his own. He questions God. He says, look, my own people won't listen. Why in the world would Pharaoh listen? Why would that happen? Now, since this is something I know that none of y'all would ever do, let's zoom in on Moses here, okay? Let's look at him. What is he doing here that's wrong? Nailed it. What's he doing here that's setting himself up to possibly render his own obedience moot, done with? Taking his eyes off God. It's exactly right. He's leaning into himself here. In short, I would say he is leaning into his own understanding. Now, I don't know if it's his emotions going on, it's his intellect, maybe it's his life experience or his education that leads him to this conclusion. Maybe it's a conglomeration of all of them. But whatever label we put on it here, Moses questions the command of God. The command that was so clear. And not only did God in this instance tell him exactly what to do, because how many of you like it when God gives you exact directions? Oh, I like those. A lot of times it seems vague to me, but this is exact. And he gives him exact directions. And then he even tells him, this is the end game. This is how it's going to play out. Yet Moses questions here the Lord's command. And it's exactly what Corey said. He starts to focus on himself. Moses turns inward. And this is where Moses messes up. He says, why would Pharaoh listen to me? I can't speak well. I'm not eloquent. Me. Moses takes his focus off God and his promises and turns it around on himself and his own perceptions. The focus changes. I was looking at God. I was looking at his promise. But now I'm not equipped. I'm not worthy. I'm not enough. I can't do this. I don't have the title. I don't have the resources. I don't have the position. And what was focusing on a perfect God and a perfect promise that I can tell you is going to come to pass, because fast forward, they get out of the desert. Moses' focus shifts from a perfect God and a promise that is true to himself, who all of us know are not always going to be perfect. Broken. The shift happens. But Proverbs 3:5 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding. See, it's Moses' own understanding that threatens to sabotage his obedience. It's his own perception, his own estimation of this situation that threatens to see him fall short. Not what God's going to do, but his own estimation of his own abilities, of what he can do, what he feels like he can be worked through. But God, I know myself. I know I can't do this. I'm not equipped. I don't have the training. But it's not Moses that's doing it. God's the one who called him. God's the one who chose him. God's the one who said, you go and do this and I'll take care of it. It's not Moses that is doing it. It's God. See, we do not have to understand what God calls us to. This might be a moment somebody like goes, oh my God, my life changes. A big change in your whole reality. Oh my gosh, somebody's getting set free. You don't have to understand what God calls you to do. You don't have to understand it. You don't have to get it. You just got to know I'm supposed to do it. We do not have to understand and comprehend what God calls us to do. We don't have to know how it's going to happen, how it's going to play out. We don't have to comprehend the X's and the O's and how it's all going to come. And this is going to happen. Oh, and then this is going to happen. You don't have to get it. You don't have to, because God is the one doing it. He's using you. He's called you to play a part, but it's God who is orchestrating the whole thing. Oh, it is so good, isn't it? Somebody can step into walking out your calling now because you've been hesitating, saying, how's this going to work? How's it going to play out? But what if? But I'm not. What, me. No, get your focus on the Lord. What did he say to do? Well, it wouldn't be wise of me to ignore everything I've ever learned. I can't just blindly take God at promises and his word. It wouldn't be wise of me to ignore all these things I know about myself. Well, that depends. Did he call you? Did he say it? Because if so, your opinion don't really matter. He's right. That's the message. I can quit. He's right. But I know myself. No, he created you. He knows you better than you know yourself. He sees you. Every tear you've cried, he sees it. The numbers of the hairs on your head, he knows them. He knows you inside and out. He knit you together in your mother's womb, but yeah, you know yourself better than the Lord does. You know what you're capable of. God knows you. God knows you. Trust in the Lord. That's that trust part. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Now, it doesn't say trust in yourself, does it? Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge who? Him. And he will make your path straight. You don't make your path straight. He makes your path straight. You can veer off it. He makes your path straight. See, this is where we mess up so often. We like to acknowledge ourselves more than we acknowledge God. Yeah. Oh, I'm wanting to preach today. This is it, y'all. We acknowledge us over acknowledging him. We value our own perception, our own estimation over what God says. It says in my Bible, we acknowledge him. Yet we give more weight to our own opinion often than we do God's opinion. Well, I know he says, I'm clean, but I don't feel clean. Well, I know that it says I'm more than a conqueror through Christ, but I don't feel that. I actually feel defeated. See, that's trusting our own estimation of ourselves over what God says. We trust our own measuring of a situation of us over him, over the call he gives us, over the command he gives us. Trust in the Lord, not in yourself. He says, acknowledge him in all your ways. In verse 7, do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. See, your wisdom is trumped by the wisdom of God. Your wisdom's trumped by the wisdom of God. I hope you're pursuing wisdom. I hope everyone in here is wise. But when it comes to wisdom, you don't hold a candle to the Lord. Not at all. Not at all. You know, when I read this verse, when I usually go to this verse, I read it in context of like my own arrogance. Like, okay, I don't need to be wise in my own eyes. I don't need to think myself the smartest person around. I don't need to be arrogant, right? But in context of these other verses, this is saying your wisdom pales in comparison to the wisdom of God. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord. What's that mean? Reverence him, honor him. That means follow what he says, follow his commands. See, so many of us take what we think about ourselves and we place it over what God says about us. We believe our own narrative about ourselves more than who he says that we are. And what the call that he gives us is, and the command that he's given us. We place it above. But how is one way that I honor him, that I revere him, that I fear him? I just do what he says. I walk it out. I believe his promises. I keep coming back to it. But I know that the promise can seem far off sometimes. There's no denying that. The promise can seem like a long time in coming. So what do we do while we wait? What do we do while we're just not feeling it, you know? Verse 13, then the Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron and gave them a charge. It was to the sons of Israel and to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to bring the sons of Israel out of the land of Egypt. God said, here's your part. I hear you. I see you. I see that you're discouraged. I see that you're broken. But here's what I want you to do. Keep doing your part. Go tell Pharaoh to let the people go. Keep leading the people. I would love to sit here today and be able to give you some simple thing like, you know, well, what do you do when you're discouraged? Just get around encouraging people. Quit being around discouraging people. I've heard that preached in churches before. I'm not saying it's a bad advice, but what happens when you're actually called to discouraging people? What happens when you're called to people who are broken in spirit? Because Moses was. I am. All of us are to some extent because all of us are called to make disciples of Jesus in a broken world. So what do we do when we're just not feeling it? What do we do when the promise still seems so far off? We do our part. You cannot control what somebody else is going to do. They might respond and it's the best feeling ever. They might just have nothing to do with it. But I can tell you this, God is faithful. You can be faithful. And you can keep playing your part. You can keep going back to God when it's hard. You can keep trusting and believing that he's moving in ways that you don't understand when it's not easy. Because he's always faithful. And we're going to close today by standing to our feet and worshiping the Lord again. This God who is always faithful. He's faithful even when I'm not feeling it. Even when I can't see things he's doing, I have to know in the pit of who I am, that he is moving, that he is speaking, that he is the one changing people's hearts. Because I can't change them, but God can. But God can. Because he is a promise-keeping God. He's the one who's faithful yesterday, today, and forever. So my message to you today, church, is to worship him, to press into him, and trust him no matter what. Because he's faithful, and he's good, and he will see you through it.